Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Brandy Gray, Talent Management Professional and Speaker Ambassador for MT Sherm's Programs Committee. I'm so glad you reserved this time in your day to join us for this relevant conversation around the effects of positive feedback. In today's discussion, Kate will break down the essential components of positive feedback and demonstrate its link to employee engagement and motivation. We'll also explore how consistent, meaningful feedback moves beyond annual reviews to create a workplace where team members feel empowered and appreciated every day. If you're like me, you are eager to hear from our speaker. So let's address a few housekeeping items and then we'll dive right in. Our speaker has prepared a special presentation for you, and we welcome each of you to participate by sharing experiences and questions using the chat and QA features. I will monitor the chat for questions and comments, and we'll also have time at the end of the presentation for questions. But feel free to pop questions in the chat at any moment during the webinar. Also, we would love to hear your feedback about the webinar. There will be a short survey provided at the end of the presentation via email, and we use this data to ensure that we continue to provide you, our members and guests, with speakers and topics that are relevant and interesting to you. Finally, a follow-up email will be sent to all attendees a few days after this webinar, and it will contain your CE credit information. So with that being said, let's jump in with the introduction of our speaker. Our speaker is Kate Vendemio. She's a workplace learning consultant, a dynamic speaker, and a small business owner based in the Washington, D.C. area. With nearly 20 years of experience, she's known as a trusted expert in workplace feedback, emotional intelligence, and team collaboration. Kate combines practical know-how with a genuine passion for helping people do their best work. Her hands-on experiential learning style keeps participants engaged and leads to real lasting change. As the founder and CEO of Mount Vernon Consulting, Kate leads a team that helps organizations unlock their potential through customized training and facilitation. Her clients include federal agencies, small businesses, and large corporations. And her programs strengthen communication and teamwork in both hybrid and in-person settings. Kate is especially passionate about making learning memorable. She often uses interactive activities and role-playing to help ideas stick. Inspired by her favorite book, Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, she believes that diverse perspectives and healthy conflict make teams stronger. So, Kate, I will give you screen access and pass it over to you.
Okay. Well, hello, Tennessee. Nice to chat with everybody today and this morning. My name is Kate Vendemio, as was referenced. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. It is nice weather today here. So not sure what it's like in Tennessee, but it's still, we get that little tip of maybe it's fall, little tease of it. But I'm kind of excited for the fall season to come up. So before I go ahead and share my slides, I also just wanted to make a reference that some of you might be familiar with my colleague, Mac Monroe, who is the former owner of Boss Builders. So Mac and I have worked together for many years. And as if you do know him, he did retire in August, but the Boss Builders program lives on through my organization. So we are still continuing to offer that leadership development program. So Max, all of his hard work is just being now it's part of his legacy, and it is now transitioned over to my company. So that's why I was specifically excited to meet with the Middle Tennessee SHRM group, because I think many of you know Mac. So with that in mind, we are going to talk today about that beyond the annual review. So what do we do to integrate feedback into the workplace? And I find when I present this to different HR groups, I find that a lot of times HR is nodding and saying, yep, we know this. We know that this is important. The trick is sometimes getting it to pass along to other members of your group or your organization? How do you instill some of this cultural change within the organization? And I will tell you up front that it needs to start with you. If you're a person who is delivering effective feedback more regularly, it then does start a ripple effect within your organization. So let's talk a little bit about that. I like to be a pretty casual presentation style. So if people have questions in the chat, please feel free to put it in, and then I will periodically look at the chat to see how I can answer some of those questions. All right, so we are going to begin. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so hopefully you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes, looks good.
Got to make sure that I pull everything up and I can see everything on both sides. Okay, there we go. I got some stuff pulled up on the other. Oh, come on my other screen. This is tricky. I don't know if the rest of you love the double screen the way I do, but it sometimes is hard with presentations. But okay, so again, we are going to talk about now today beyond that annual review, but how we are going to work on powering performance and retaining your employees throughout the year through the concept of feedback. So let's go ahead and start. First, I wanted to show you a picture of my pup. This is Pepper. She's actually, if she hears me just say her name, she might be scratching at the door. She's was not invited to this participation because sometimes, or this presentation, because sometimes she's not the most well behaved. But this is Pepper. She is a pandemic pup. So we adopted her around 2021. She's a rescue. We don't know exactly how old she is, but she was probably born around the pandemic, kind of 2020 time. And when we first got Pepper, we had never really had a dog. At least, my husband had grown up with some dogs, but, never really had one as adults. And it's very different to raise a dog when you're an adult because you have to do all of the hard work, including training the dog. So when we first got her, we didn't really know what to do. We decided to take her to a place that I Google searched that was offering dog training, and it had some good reviews. So we took her there, and the whole family went the first day because, again, we didn't really know what we were doing. And they put on a choke collar. So if anyone's familiar, it's like a pronged collar that you put around the dog's neck. And when she would start to wander away, then the trainer would snap the leash and then the dog's neck would redirect towards us. And as we were doing it, I just felt very uncomfortable, right? I just felt like, my gosh, every time this dog does something wrong, we're like redirecting her and, punishing her. We're not focusing on what she's doing well. And so, that training method works for some people. For us, it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel innate. And so from there, we took her to another trainer. And that's where I learned the term of positive feedback, or we're giving positive training techniques. And so we found that with Pepper, when we were able to train her and focus more on the positive, we actually got a significantly better response and quicker. So we did click training. So if she did something well, we'd click, say yes, give her a treat. If she didn't do what we commanded her to do, we just ignored it. And so what she started to realize is that when she does something well, she gets rewarded for it. She gets a click, she gets a yes, she gets a treat, she gets lots of time and attention. And so now I am very proud to say she has a very expansive repertoire of tricks, which includes sit, stay, and sometimes I can get her to spin. But it still is something that we had to work really hard on to do. And I use this example for Pepper not because I'm saying an analogy that all of your employees are animals, okay? So I don't want people to get all upset and worried about that. But what I am saying is that if you think about it, in other areas of our life right now, in other facets of our life, we're very focused on offering positive feedback. If anybody has children or has raised children in the last maybe 10, 15 years, there is definitely a shift towards delivering positive feedback to children. If you have had to potty train a toddler, what you do now is a lot of times we're encouraged to do these rewards charts. You went potty, great job. I'm going to give you a sticker. We're reinforcing something that you did well. If you have an accident, we say, okay, what are the lessons we learned? Let's focus again on making sure we go potty. Next time we go potty, we get a sticker, right? We are finding that in other areas of our life, child rearing and dog training and all kinds of other things, we're focusing a lot on the positive. We're reinforcing that positive. We don't always see that translate over into the workplace. So I want you to just think for a moment about, do you notice any divergence between maybe how you work and interact with and treat people at home, and then what those expectations are like in the workplace? And it might be something that you've never even really thought about before, but that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about why it is so important for us to be able to deliver that positive feedback in the workplace. All right, so let's focus right here is why do we find that why am I focusing on positive feedback? Well, there's actually a lot of reasons and data and statistics for why we want to encourage positive feedback in the workplace. The first thing is when we give someone reinforcement for something they've done, it releases dopamine in the brain. That dopamine gives us a little kick, a little thrill, and it encourages us to want to continue to offer that. It also boosts our motivations. If someone is noticing what I'm doing, if someone takes the time to acknowledge that I'm doing something well, it inherently makes me want to continue to do that behavior. One, I notice people, or I recognize that people notice what I'm doing. And two, I'm getting reinforced for continuing that behavior. Other reasons why it works is that it strengthens your learning and confidence. We're reinforcing when people are doing something well. And I will pause right here and let you know that this is not Pollyanna thinking that life is rainbows and unicorns. We are going to talk about the value of constructive feedback, but right now we're focusing in this part about specifically about positive. So don't worry, we're going to have a little balance of positive and constructive feedback, but right here we're going to focus on that positive. All right, so we talked about how it strengthens your learning and confidence in the workplace, and it also continues to build that psychological safety and trust that we know is so important to serving as the foundation for successful teams. Again, when people receive feedback, we find that they are more likely to continue to do the positive behavior or modify their constructive behavior. We find actually that data tells us that praise can raise productivity in the workplace by, that's right, you read that correctly, 90%. When we focus on praising the people that we work with, when we focus on praising our staff, we can significantly increase productivity. Let's look at this a slightly different way. When your brain receives positive feedback, again, there's that dopamine release, that hit that you get that makes you feel good, makes you want to continue to do that. And then you will likely be more increased likelihood of actually repeating that behavior. So it goes in a bit of a cycle. We give positive feedback, you feel good about yourself, you want to continue to offer that. If I'm not totally convinced you yet, let's talk about some other statistics or some data that's going to show us why positive feedback is so impactful in the workplace. We find that high performing teams receive nearly 6 times more positive feedback than less effective teams. So there is a correlation. When teams receive more positive feedback, they can be up to 6 times more productive and effective than teams that don't receive positive feedback. We find that offering simply one thank you a week can drop the turnover rate in your organization by up to 50%. Think about that for a minute. When's the last time you've heard people say thank you to one another? When's the last time that people have been able to recognize and support one another in the workplace? One simple thank you per week could potentially decrease your turnover by 50%. We find that the 43% versus 18%, that's the difference in weekly feedback that engaged employees receive versus disengaged employees. So, again, not even just positive feedback, but feedback in general. An engaged employee is going to receive about 43% more, well, 43% of feedback versus disengaged employees. They only get about 18%. Again, correlation between engagement and receiving feedback, uh, recognition and receiving feedback, productivity and receiving feedback. We also see here that this is a startling data statistic is that 80% is the amount of employees who receive negative feedback who are looking for a new job. Now, there's a lot of different factors that play into that. And it could be they're receiving negative feedback because they're just not good at their job or they're not producing what they need to do. And so sometimes there is things such as positive attrition. But what we find is that if organizations and particularly supervisors are focused primarily on only pointing out flaws, then they will have a significantly less engaged workplace and more people will be looking to transition out of the organization or at least out of that team. So let's talk a little bit here about our feedback loop. All right. I'm not sure if anyone here has heard of the feedback loop before. Sorry, I'm trying to move this screen again so I can see everybody. All right. So we can see here that this is the feedback loop. So it starts in the upper right-hand corner with an action. So you have an employee that does an action. Then we provide feedback to them. So let's say you have someone who gave a fantastic presentation. So that's the action. Then the feedback would be, hey, when you delivered that presentation, you spoke really eloquently and you were able to manage the questions from the audience very quickly and professionally. That moves over to your brain response. Your brain either feels like, wow, that was really positive. There's my dopamine hit. I'm really excited. I'm going to continue to do that type of behavior. I'm going to continue to work on my presentation skills. I'm going to continue to really be able to practice thinking on my feet, answering questions. Let's look at it a different way. If someone gave a presentation and it wasn't super great, right? The feedback could be still productive and it could be constructive. It doesn't always have to be positive. But let's say you say to them, you know what? I noticed when you gave that presentation, you stumbled over some of the wording. And so let's talk about some different ways that we can have you be more prepared for the next conversation. So again, that is still constructive feedback, but your brain is not necessarily defensive. So what we find is with that brain response, that's what really informs us to close that feedback loop. In the upper left-hand corner you see here is to adjust or repeat that behavior. So we have our action, we deliver our feedback. How we deliver our feedback impacts how our brain responds. And our brain then decides if they want to adjust or repeat that behavior or if they have put the halt on what that feedback is. And we'll talk about in a minute what happens when you break that feedback loop. Let me give you an example here, again, that might help a little bit put this in mind. So that action, this action here, let's say a supervisor de-escalates a tense situation between two employees and HR happened to be present and witness this situation. And the feedback is that the HR recognizes the behavior and they say the way that you listened and calmed the room really modeled strong leadership. We look at the brain response. The supervisor, they feel like, you know what, I'm feeling really good about that. That was a high intensity situation. Feeling really good about that. I feel really validated. I'm going to continue to do that behavior again, and I'm going to encourage my team to do that behavior. So then when we see adjust or repeat the behavior is that the result is not only is that supervisor modeling positive behavior, but they're going to start showing people on their teams how important it is to be able to diffuse situations, to be able to have a more psychologically safe work environment. It leads to increased trust, which leads to increased engagement, which leads to increased retention. There is a whole baseline for why feedback is so important in the workplace. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions from the group so far. You can feel free to unmute yourself or put any questions in the chat. And as you're doing that, if you're typing in the chat, I'll move to the next slide to just give you a minute or two to put some questions in. Anyone want to come them off of mute and add in a thought or a question so far? Oh, okay, it says please raise your hand if you would like to unmute. Nope. Okay. Well, I'm going to continue on as we continue talking. All right. So, again, we talked about what happens with that positive feedback loop and even the constructive feedback loop. Let's talk about here what happens when that feedback loop breaks. So, again, let's say you have that action where you give feedback to someone who did not do well on a presentation, and then you give them some harsh feedback. You say that did not go well. We got to talk about a lot of things. I need you to come meet me in my office in 5 minutes. So what happens is the brain suddenly starts hearing, this is a threat. This is dangerous. This is dangerous. I'm worried. So then we see this arrow that goes over to what happens. Your cortisol spikes in your brain, your amygdala gets hijacked, and then your prefrontal cortex actually shuts down. So when your brain is feeling threatened, when you feel as if you are not secure, when you feel as if you're being proverbial backed into a corner, your brain actually shuts down. And when that amygdala gets hijacked, that portion of your brain that allows you to think rationally and clearly, we find that it can take 20 to 30 minutes for it to calm back down to think in a more rational way. When I had really little kids, I remember studying something about the amygdala hijack, and someone in the book I was reading was saying that it's basically what happens when a toddler throws a temper tantrum. Right? The prefrontal cortex shuts down. They don't have a fully free frontal cortex anyway, but then their amygdala gets hijacked and then they can't think rationally. They're upset, they're screaming, and it takes a while for them to calm down. Well, the same thing happens to us as adults, and we might have fully developed free prefrontal cortex, but we handle that stress internally more regularly. So we might not be throwing an external temper tantrum, but we're still having all those internal ways that our brains are reacting. The cortisol spikes, our amygdala is all out of whack, and we just completely shut down. We get into that fight or flight arena. And then what we find is that it halts your ability to be productive. It halts your ability to be creative. So we don't actually continue on with that feedback loop. When we give harsh feedback, it stops the loop because the brain feels as if it is a threat. Now, what we also find is when there is no feedback delivered, then we don't have a loop at all because there's nothing to loop through. And that's what I find is one of the most prevalent situations I am working with my clients on right now, especially when we're in a remote situation. It's harder if you are working in hybrid or remote. It is much harder to give feedback, especially with intentionality, when you are not co-located together in the same space. It takes a lot more time and thought and effort to deliver feedback, both positive and constructive, when you are working in a remote or hybrid environment. And so what happens is a lot of times supervisors just don't give the feedback. They just don't give it. So let's think about what are the consequences of if you're not delivering feedback at all. In
Hey,
fact,
Kate, to
yes.
to interrupt you, we have a comment in the chat. Kelly said, in my life, I've worked in a situation where the only time the supervisor engaged with me was to tell me if I did something wrong. Over time, I was terrified to come to work because I would wonder, will I lose my job today? Obviously, I can't do anything right. Turns out that is not how my supervisor felt about me, but because I never heard anything but the negative, I thought I was a horrible employee and was miserable every time I was at work.
Wow. Well, first off, thank you for sharing that, Kelly. I'm sure that was a very that's something very vulnerable to share with the group. So I appreciate that, and what an amazing story and real life example of that. Right? This is what happens is when people can't verbalize their thinking or they choose to not verbalize their thinking, then we're left to fill in that narrative. We're left to fill in that gap. And so we start doing things like piecing together pieces of information and we start climbing up that ladder of inference, which is one of my favorite phrases out there. But we piece together, oh, okay, my supervisor only talks to me if he's got something negative to say. Therefore, he must not like my performance. He must not like me. Therefore, I should be looking for another job. When it sounds like in reality, when Kelly had the conversation or it finally came out, she realized that that actually wasn't the case. But the supervisor would not take the time, it sounds like, to actually deliver any type of positive feedback. We do find there is a bit of a generational, there's some generational guidelines that sometimes come into play here. And we do find that, especially our younger generations in the workplace, are from a more feedback rich culture. Think about your Gen Zs that are in the workplace right now. They've grown up with technology, they've grown up with social media. Think about when someone puts a comment on or something on, Facebook, or now it's Instagram and TikTok. If we put something out there, people get likes. That is a form of feedback. People get views. They know how many people are viewing their video or their post. Then they get likes to it. Then they get comments on it. That's all ways that we're reinforcing and delivering feedback to somebody. Now, we might not agree with what they like, so, but we have to think about it in terms of our younger generations are very used to not only positive reinforcement, but they're used to getting it regularly. Again, this is a generation that grew up being exposed to social media, exposed to gamification when they do video games, etc., getting used to that sort of immediate dopamine hit and getting a more positive reinforcement for what they do. That's not to say that our more experienced generations in the workplace are hesitant to give feedback or they're not good at it. But what it does mean is it might not come as naturally to them. I always find one of the biggest ironies is that, people that have raised the newest generation in the workforce. So what you find is that in the workforce, a lot of times they'll have a more experienced person and then a newer person, and they're essentially they're the gap of like one of them could have been the child and one of them is the parent, right? And then the older generation gets so frustrated about, oh, this newer, younger generation is so entitled. Then you think, well, you're the ones that raised him. So we have to think about that too, sort of some of that translation of how we treat people in our personal lives can really should be extended in a positive way into our professional lives. So thank you again, Kelly, for sharing that experience. If anyone else wants to put any comments in the chat, go ahead, please. In the meantime, I am going to now kind of transition over to, we've talked about why positive feedback is so important, but I am curious as to why or how often do you avoid giving feedback and why? What gets in the way of you delivering feedback? Go ahead and type that in the chat or raise your hand to unmute yourself. We talked about those that are in this hybrid or remote work environment, how that can create some issues and some tension. But let's go ahead and see, how often do you avoid giving feedback and what is that barrier? Okay, so I'm seeing personality challenges. Interesting. Okay. So sometimes it might just not be worth it. Scared of conflict. Mm-hmm. Definitely true. We don't know how that other person will react, or maybe in the past they've been volatile. Maybe we don't have that level of trust with them that is important to have. Okay, resistant to change. Okay, so I'm not sure if you mean if they're resistant to change or if you're resistant to change. All right, easier. Oh, Verlinda. Hi, Verlinda. I know Verlinda. um, resistant to change, easier to just do it yourself than give the feedback on how to change or work differently. Right? It's just so much easier for me to just do it myself because by the time I share it with you and then you don't do it the way I wanted to, I'm gonna have to go back and do it myself anyway. Um, all right, I'm seeing culture hasn't been set up for these types of conversations. We're just not sure how to deliver this effective feedback. Right? There's a lot of different reasons why resistance to change. Okay, from the employees. Thank you, Krista. There's a lot of different reasons that feed into why we avoid giving feedback. But again, I want us to think too that, even in these responses, and thank you for everyone who did respond. We want to think about in these responses that we typically equate feedback with negative. We think, oh, feedback is a difficult conversation. Feedback is something that I don't really want to give. I'm going to avoid it. I don't know how to do it. People don't, trust each other. People are not going to react well. When we start to deliver more positive feedback, we start to build trust with those employees. We start to focus on what they're doing well, letting them know that we're observing it. And then that's continuing to build their confidence and their trust with you. So I'm going to challenge you to really change your mindset to think that feedback is not always negative. It's not always tough conversations. It's not always something that we want to avoid. In fact, the more we deliver it, the more effective that really constructive feedback can be. There's a lot of different statistics out there of the ratio of positive feedback to constructive feedback. The one I generally follow is about 4 pieces of positive feedback for every 1 piece of constructive feedback. So with that in mind, I'm curious as to any thoughts from the group on what are some ways to give positive feedback. Think about in your organizations. Are there any platforms? Are there any kudos that your groups do? What are some ways that you can deliver positive feedback in the workplace? Okay, so a company newsletter highlight. Absolutely. If you're in an organization that's big enough to have a company newsletter, that is a fantastic opportunity. It does mean that you, as the supervisor or the director or the team member, have to take the time to write it up and submit it. All right, but that is one potential way that you can recognize or give feedback to your employees. What are some other ways or some strategies or platforms that you can utilize to increase delivering effective, positive feedback in the workplace? Going to give you a minute to type in those responses. Nothing, nobody in this whole, oh, here we go. Thank you. All right. Quick message to an individual on Teams saying that I appreciate them and why. Excellent. Shout out and a company all call meeting. hmm At the beginning of your one on one. Absolutely. Company town hall shout out. Tell them they're doing a good job when they do a good job. Give the examples of when they went above and beyond. Telling why is the most important aspect. Making sure to highlight positives in performance reviews. Excellent. So these are all kinds of different ways. So we're seeing that there is things, feedback in a positive way can sometimes lean into recognition and praise. But what we find is also being thoughtful about the intentionality behind how often you deliver it. Okay, so the trick with positive feedback in particular, well, feedback in general, but positive in particular, is making sure you're saying it right then and there when possible. So if someone does something really well, and sure, it's an above and beyond, right? That presentation, that's sort of like that career defining moment for them. Sure, we're going to escalate that. We're going to put that in a company newsletter. We're going to make an all staff announcement. We're going to have the team, clap for them. But there's a lot of other little behaviors that people do every single day that can warrant some additional recognition and feedback. So I'd encourage you to think not just of those, town halls and the newsletters and the shout outs, which are fine, but I want you to also think about some smaller ways that you can start to reinforce positive behavior. And I see here, yeah, knowing your employees, some prefer individual quiet recognition and some prefer a company shout out is absolutely very, very important because not everyone loves to be publicly recognized. I see here recognizing small behaviors creates a culture that embraces feedback. Absolutely. So, again, I want you to think about some opportunities to do that. When you are in person, again, a little bit easier. You're walking out of a meeting and maybe you catch up with one of your team members and say, the way that you handled that question back there was really professional. Nice job, keep it up. And then you keep walking, right? If you've had someone says something really important or impactful on a Teams meeting, giving a thumbs up is a form of feedback. It's letting them know that you're paying attention to what's going on. Those one-on-one meetings, if you are blessed with only having a couple staff members and not 20, 30, 40 staff members, and you can do those individual one-on-one meetings, that's when you can kick it off with saying, I noticed this week, I noticed, or I heard, or I've witnessed, right? Sharing something that you've seen with them that's positive that they did. Because once you start building up that trust, when you do have those tough conversations, when you do need to talk about those really touchy subjects that are a little bit more focused on the negative, you kind of build up that trust battery, so to speak. So let's go into talking about that. So again, as I said, I don't have any illusions that we're running around and everyone is happy and dancing to rainbows. But I do think that it's not an issue. Is I'm never against actually giving constructive feedback. Where we run into the challenge is giving it effectively. And that's where most people, quite frankly, mess up. They don't give it effectively, they give it harshly, or they'll make generalizations like, you're always late to work. Okay. You always blow up when I tell you these things, or I know you're going to get defensive, right? Those are very triggering sort of comments. And what it does is that feedback loop immediately starts to break because as soon as people are put on the defensive, again, they shut down, their brain goes into fight or flight mode, and they're not processing what you're saying. There are very effective ways to give constructive feedback and to do it really well. So, when we do deliver that effective feedback, we want to make sure that it is very specific and timely. So, someone messes up, continuing my example of a presentation, someone flubbed over some of the data, got questioned about it afterwards, and it's realized that that person perhaps didn't do the amount of research needed to really have it be a fully effective presentation. So you have that conversation with them, and we say, along the lines of, let's chat about that presentation. I noticed, see, using some of those I verbs, I noticed, I saw, I witnessed, or it seemed like you were feeling, you weren't very, you weren't feeling very confident in your information or your data. Let's talk about that. Okay, right there, it's timely, it's specific, and you're also giving them room to speak and to respond. Let's talk about that. What happened? What could you have done differently? What are you going to change moving forward? Moving into more of that coaching role, because a lot of times people do know when they've messed up. People are aware, and maybe it needs help coming to the surface, but coaching them through some of their own answers can actually really help with some of those difficult conversations as well. So, again, if we want to really focus on making sure that when we're delivering feedback, we're delivering it in a way that it's done constructively. We don't want to break that feedback loop. We want to continue giving the feedback loop, even if it is difficult conversations or a difficult piece of feedback to deliver. So, as we think through some of this, I do want to make it really clear that, I want you to really think about feedback should be happening regularly. Feedback is not performance management. Feedback should be happening several times, ideally a day, if not a week. It could be something like thumbs up, it could be a smile, or it could be significantly more in depth. But we want to move towards that culture of having a feedback culture in general. And then that can actually lead into how do you create a feedback culture where we're not just performance reviews every 6 months or a year. And again, how do you handle it is that you in the HR group are the ones that are really managing it. So here's kind of where I leave us with is that, what happens is what does HR face? So you find that your managers maybe are avoiding the conversation, and then their team members are frustrated. They want to leave, or they're not engaged and they're not producing what they need to. And so then they go to HR, and then HR is dreading what's going on because now they have to then go ahead and clean up that mess. Anyone feel like that kind of aligns with what they've witnessed in the past? As you find that there's, your managers maybe aren't delivering the feedback that they need to, and they need some guidance, they need some understanding, and then HR is left to clean up that mess. And that can be really frustrating. So, what are some ways that you can help do this and help one, giving managers more training? Leadership training for new managers is so critical and it's so important. And right now, the way that the economy is and the way that budgets are working, we're finding that, as you know, people are cutting HR, they're cutting training, they're cutting leadership development, but then they still want these managers to thrive. So there is a big disservice that we're doing to specifically our newer managers that are coming up right now into the workplace. So we're just throwing them in and having them start doing their job. And then we get frustrated because they don't know how to display some of these leadership tendencies. Well, someone's got to teach them. They have to learn somehow. So if you can somehow get through and make some influence on budgets and try and bring in some more training to your organization, that's one strategy on feedback. Another thing is to continue to model it yourself. Make sure that you are starting it. It is a ripple effect. The more that you offer it, the more that you find that other people start to pay it forward. And it could take a while for that cultural change to happen, but it could start with you. It can start by modeling with you. A few other suggestions that I've had clients do is there are some now platforms that are out there where there's this one that's like kind of an AI type platform, which I know can be a little controversial to people, but what it does is it pops up a reminder about I think it's once a week, for the supervisor to type in something, any type of feedback about that employee. And then it aggregates all of the data through the year so that when it comes to the performance review time, that employee or that manager can go back and look at a whole list of things that the person has done both positively and constructively throughout the performance life cycle. Now, again, I would encourage managers and therefore HR to encourage managers that, again, none of those conversations should be happening in a vacuum, and they shouldn't be happening just at performance management time. But it could be a prompt that encourages your managers to offer up that feedback periodically throughout the year. So those are three different arenas where I really see that HR can start to make an impact on creating more of a feedback culture in the workplace. So I'm going to open it now again up to you and see what are some other ways that you as an organ in your organizations are, or how can you, or how are you bringing feedback and introducing this culture of feedback, both positive and constructive? Any strategies or suggestions that you have for the group? Okay, I have Brandy, I'm gonna leave you to unmute people. So I see Kelly has her raised hand, but I see Brandy says we have a kudos board in the break room. I love that. Um, I think that's really fun. Sadie, I can look up the platform for you. I don't endorse them personally. It's just a vendor that I've met and that has actually offering some cool things. And then I see Emily is using a recognition platform where peers and managers can recognize each other. During town halls, we shout out teams and individuals. Um, yeah, I used to work for a company where they had the
Yeah,
golden tool belt.
let it spend out. Let it
Oh,
spend
I
out.
think I hear some going on in the
We
background.
have Kelly unmuted. She was going to share her
Oh,
comment. You
all
can
right,
go ahead,
Kelly.
Kelly.
Go ahead, Kelly. We'll see.
Yes, so I was just going to point out the comment about the constructive criticism or constructive feedback, that when the supervisors provide that, whether they have done it in a harsh way or in a more gentle, positive way. I think it's important when you've told that employee, here's this area where you need to improve, is sometimes that's where they leave it. They have that
Mhm.
conversation, but in a week or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, that supervisor should really go back and say, I've noticed that you really took that seriously and you made some improvement. Thank you so much. Because otherwise, that employee doesn't know if they've actually corrected the problem or not to the satisfaction of that supervisor. So I think that's an important piece of feedback to close out that process.
Absolutely. I think that's a really thank you for sharing that. I think that's really impactful. And not only that, but I would encourage supervisors to actually leave that initial conversation with some guidance for next steps. Right? Because what happens is we will say, yeah, that speech, we need to work on it. I really need you to work on not saying so much. And then we just leave it at that. So what's really helpful and impactful is spending another few minutes with that employee and saying, what are some things that you can do between now and your next speech to practice your dictation or practice not saying or or being more accurate with your data. And then exactly like Kelly said, is then wow, Maya, I just had a total tongue twister. Following up with them afterwards to reinforce again that you're noticing that they're doing the work to try and improve, because that's really where that value comes in. At the end of the day, managers are coaches. We are trying to give guidance and give feedback to both reinforce the positive things and modify some of those more constructive behaviors that we need to focus on. So thank you, Kelly. I see here in the chats we use acceleration for a recognition platform and enjoy it. I see our HRIS system allows for kudos, and we're just seeing it starting to be used. Absolutely. I have seen some organizations that use Slack and they have a kudos channel specifically for Slack. I think I was starting to say I worked for an organization a long time ago where we had the tool belt of success was the analogy, and it was a hammer that every team meeting we had once a month, we would give the golden hammer to someone else who had done something really positive that had been recognized either by a client or internally. And we would nominate that person, or the person who had the golden hammer would then be responsible for who they would pass it on to the next time. And it was a point of pride to have that little hammer hanging outside of your cubicle so that people could see that you were being recognized that month for what your positive contribution was. Let's see. And then I see here, setting the example by offering positive feedback in meaningful ways is the first step in creating culture for leaders and HR. Thank you so much, Verlinda. That is a wonderful transition to talk about now. This is really the time to start what we call the positivity effect in your organization. And that positivity effect is, again, focusing on positive things that people are doing and recognizing it. Again, I don't think that every single thing should only be positive, but when you spend more time focusing on the positive aspects of things, you then build more credibility for when you have some more of those constructive, deeper conversations. And if you are curious and would like some additional information, this is by no means a sales pitch. I'm just offering it to you for free. You can download we have a positivity effect toolkit for HR and managers. So you can either click on this little QR code, or you can just type in mountvernonconsulting.com/positivity effect. And that is a great resource for you on how to continue to build that positivity effect into your workplace. And with that, I am going to turn it back to Brandy. I know I hope that I didn't speak too long over, but tell me, I know you needed to
Yes.
make some announcements and whatnot.
Yes, perfect timing, perfect timing. As we wrap up today, I just want to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Kate, for such an insightful and relevant discussion. I know I'm walking away with several actionable takeaways that will help me, and I'm sure many of you grow professionally and personally. So before we close, I just wanted to share a few upcoming MT Sherm events that you won't want to miss. So Thursday, we have our October networking event that's going to be at Penn's Mechanical. It's in Nashville, and it starts at 4:30 in the evening. And then on Friday, we have our MTSU breakfast series, and that series is titled Ins and Outs of a Career in Talent Acquisition. That will be in Murfreesboro at the MTSU Foundation House at 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday. Then we have our monthly HR networking group, and we call it our career transition group meeting. So if you're looking to transition your career, join us. It's a webinar online, and it's on Monday, so it'll be on the 20th at 4:30 in the afternoon. And then we have another October webinar, and it's titled Planning Made Simple: From Too Many Initiatives to a One-Page Plan. And so we have two speakers for that webinar. It is on October 21st at this same time, 11:30 to 12:30 Central. And the focus is just helping people sort of adopt a simple planning method to help you cut through that noise and really focus on what drives results. So we thank you all again for joining today. A quick reminder, you will receive an email soon regarding your CE credit, along with the short survey about today's webinar. And we truly appreciate all of your engagement, and we look forward to seeing you at another MT Sherm event soon. Have a wonderful day, you all. Thank you so much, Kate.